Thanks everyone at Palace Projects for organizing this exhibition and inviting me to be one of the selectors. It was a great pleasure and honor to be able to propose Sarah's work, which is this installation here with the paintings, and also to have the opportunity to propose the performance that we just saw and that we're going to discuss now. The performance is called WW, and it's based on this text that Sarah has wrote and that we're going to discuss, and that was published in this form as a book last year by a Cork City-based publishing company called Bloomers, with whom Sarah worked in the past, and the work that they did together in the past was an exhibition that took place in Cork City, and where this painting installation was presented before. So the selection here is always based, for periodical review, is based on work that curators might have seen in the year before or around that time, and that's where the opportunity came from. So Sarah, thanks so much for the performance, for your presentation, which is more compelling. The more I see it, the more compelling it is. And I guess we could start by asking you to tell us a bit about all the elements that you actually presented. So there's the text that you are narrating, there's the text that we hear from this other voice, there's the imagery behind you, and then there is your costume. And then finally, there is the interaction with the painting. But I would ask you to tell us a bit more about how these different elements and how they came together.
So I did most of the writing for the book WW during my master's in Glasgow. I did art writing there for a year, and when I was writing, I was like mainly reflecting on my painting practice, but I also always wrote alongside my painting practice, and usually like more poetic type writing, and this is kind of my first kind of fictionalizing or like using my own experience to reflect on like I guess the key concerns of my practice. So most of the writing was done then, and because I was like delving into this consciousness, I started playing around with sound then during the masters, and the very end I started getting into the idea of like performing this character, because became like very like strong voice, so it made sense that it was like coming off the page more, and then once I had left the masters, I continued to work on the text, and I started to put together this an exhibition with Bloomers in St. Luke's Crypt in Cork City. So that would have been like the year after graduating, and that was so at that point like the writing was kind of like, it was like translating the practice into writing, and then the writing started to like inform what I was making then. So this installation, it largely came about from that passage, which is a bit longer in the book, about the idea of the grid. And then so I guess it just that they just kind of started to feed into each other then. So the more that I had the opportunity to perform as Mary, like the more I thought about like her as a character, which was able to make the writing stronger, and then the costuming of like the blue dress. I guess I was just kind of thinking about this, like a quite traditional kind of virgin blue kind of associations with a type like Mother Ireland type figure, but then it's also kind of like a strange kind of dress, so I liked that. So I started thinking about Mary as like more of this kind of like archetype that I could start to use in other parts of my practice.
Okay, so there's a lot of references here, so maybe we go back to something you just said, which is there's a passage in the performance and a passage in the book about the grid, and that comes from writing in art history that reflect on this form and what's the relevance of that within contemporary art. And here you can see how the grid translates into the spatialization of the paintings and the presentation through the use of square formats for the actual paintings, and then the square format for the presentation. Can you tell me a bit more about, and then what I think also is fascinating in these texts and also in the performance is that combination of a more art historical or artistic set of references and how that is unpacked, and then how you mix it with pop culture and references that are more everyday, say Roy Keane appears here or there, or the interaction of the character Mary, or you being, or Mary representing you in some ways, your interactions in the pub or with male culture, or ways men somehow speak about women, and how that translates into the Irish Constitution, and then how that reflects the political system we have in Ireland. So tell us about a bit of your interest in the grid, and how that maybe reflects on the work, but then how then you navigate from the confines of art into broader experiences, whether yours or the Irish landscape.
I guess I was thinking about the idea of being confined in a space. So that relating to the Irish Constitution, where woman is enshrined in the home, and just kind of like thinking about what that necessarily means. But then also from a making perspective, I have always been interested in how, if you were to draw like a blind drawing of like a hedgerow, and that kind of like squiggle line, like how that pattern can be found like on micro and macro level, then that looks like how like Brownian motion, how like an atom would move in space, and this idea of being suspended in a space. So I guess that was kind of something that I've always thought about in relation to painting, and being on a canvas, and the canvas kind of dictating what can happen within it. So like a small canvas dictates what happens, what marks can make, and a bigger one what marks can make, and then kind of expanding out from that. So I guess in the text then as well, like all the kind of memories that Mary is thinking of is like spaces where you're kind of reminded of your form and how you can act in a particular setting. So it's the constraints that are put on you that like allow certain types of forms or behaviors to happen. So yeah, that idea of being suspended in a space is like very productive for me to think through different ideas. And then I guess the idea of the W kind of looks like that kind of squiggly line, and also it like plays a part in the story that I tell about my mother, but also this kind of idea of like there are lots, I guess, that kind of tendency to put things into like a dualist kind of perspective, there being like two ways to be, which kind of relates back to the idea of the grid again, this kind of like idea of something is like secular or it's sacred, and that just interested in being a bit more like in that in-betweeny space.
Okay, so before we forget, so there's also two things I want to still unpack. So on one hand, the imagery that you are using as the backdrop of the performance somehow connects with the imagery that we see depicted or created in the paintings. Yeah? Mm-hmm. Can you tell us more about how you think about what we actually see depicted? What are the landscapes? What are they doing? And then how do they speak or relate to questions of womanhood, or like when you say the squiggling line, when I saw the WW design in this way, I actually couldn't not think about, how this stands also for me, at least as a reference to the female body and ways of thinking about the female condition. So can you circle around this?
Yeah, so I'm like interested in using like the landscape because I guess it's so it's so related to the female, and that it I guess there is it across lots of different cultures, but specifically to Ireland, there's a literary tradition of personifying the landscape as a woman, and I'm interested in that relationship between language and landscape and how it shapes it shapes our understanding of what the landscape is, and then I tend in my work to not represent the female body, but to try and represent it through the landscape as kind of this way of occupying that space, and staking a claim in it more. So kind of being representing the landscape, but in like a bodily gestural kind of way is kind of my thinking. And so this installation, 7 Ways to Get Back, was shown in that show with bloomers. So the name of the exhibition was The Lickspin in the Lip, which is a quote from WW thinking about the idea of the grid, but the installation is talking specifically about different elements that were believed to ward off fairies. So thinking through the idea of like Irish folklore, and I liked this idea that there was 7 different things. So there was that in one reality that it was like dirt would ward off the fairies, but also in another that it was like salt. And I was thinking the idea of like how all these different narratives were like housed in the one place and that they were all possible at the same time. Which I guess like relates to Irish folklore a lot in this idea of like an other world.
Yeah, and so going back to elements of the performance and of the writing, it starts by really thinking about, well, at least you say beat time several times. So the idea of time being there, I'm interested in that, how that it's another strong concept that somehow emerges from the writing. And then also I think quite important is to ask about this sort of genre that you are part of, where you fictionalize your own experience or bring other elements. So autofiction as a way of making or of creating that you are trying to embrace, and how much of this is real, how much comes from your own experience across time, how much of that is fictionalized or pushed into areas that are beyond you. So I'm interested in that.
So I guess like the fictional element comes into it in like leaning into the persona of Mary more. So like I like playing with a kind of like girlish voice and maybe like leading into more like typically feminized kind of like traits, and like what's the word, like pushing that, and rather than like shying away from it or trying to like not be, because that has a lot to do with like the kind of speaking voice of Mary is kind of like occupying that space of being a bit like mischievous and kind of like girlish, I guess. So this kind of other woman, I guess, or
But is it an archetypical figure, or it's something that comes from your experience of growing up, say, in Cork City or in Ireland?
Yeah, so I guess it's like a reflection of my own experience, but kind of leaning into a trope. I guess like thinking about like Chris Kraus. I love Dick and how she like really like leans into something rather than like leans into something that I guess that's not like typically what's the word, typically like not respectful, I can't think of the proper word, but something that you might think is like embarrassing, and kind of like to lean into it as like as a way of like owning that space and not being relegated to it because you like claim it and think, which I think is just maybe an interesting way of thinking about like I talk about Georgia O'Keeffe as well in the book, and there's like this thing of like a woman painting flowers or whatever, and just kind of like how
do you think that's dismissive, or
or being like if that's a dismissive thing to kind of lean into it more, so that like
reclaiming that space of negativity into something that creates agency and empowers you, or the female body, or the idea of women. And also the idea of women being presented in the Irish Constitution, and then there's also a very interesting passage in the book and here where you say Artie did something to our parents. Tell me more about that. So is that something that is like common for people of your generation to reflect how women have been considered or disregarded in Irish history or in the foundation of the state, or is something that comes from a more specific feminist stance that you want to put out there?
I guess that idea of being suspended in a space kind of means that I'm thinking about the idea of like different things that kind of reverberate throughout Irish culture. So things that kind of repeat in different ways. So like I talk about Roy Keane a lot in the text, and I think he's just like an interesting figure as for like a couple of reasons. But one thing that I think is very interesting about him is like how different narratives that are like kind of repeat. So like how this kind of idea that like he represents like Irish immigration because he went to the UK to play, but then also when there was like this big fallout from Saipan, not to get too into the weeds about it, but that when he was like left the team, and there was like a lot of like talk about like being a prodigal son and this kind of like fighting in Ireland's name and all these kind of like ideas that are repeat in different ways, and it's just interesting what's like embedded in her psyche. So I think of that in relation to space as well, this kind of idea of things being in the one space and things just kind of like shifting around, but kind of the similar ideas repeating. So I guess that was kind of the idea with RTE as well, of like I guess being something in the establishment of the state, and then how how these things are like a little bit like unconscious to us, and like how we shape our identity or how we tell stories, I guess in particular, is like really shaped by really shaped like unbeknownst to us, I guess. Yeah.
And tell me a bit more now, going back to what you said at the beginning. So the work has been developed while you were doing your MA in Glasgow. This is 2021, 2022.
Yeah.
The exhibition was in 2023, late 2023. So I'm very curious to understand like how, and you said, I make my paint. I started, as an art student and as an art practitioner, my main medium was painting, but I always wrote and liked to write, and poetics, poetic prose, and then evolved into this kind of creative fiction. Tell me how you navigate those two different, creative modes and forms, and then how they intersect. Is it through the ideas, or is it through, do you make work, say, in the studio and then you go back to the writing, or it's the other way around, or how does that work?
Like from a practical process way, I don't really write in studio a whole pile. I usually write I would take notes on the go, but if I was like spending a fair bit of time writing, I wouldn't be in studio because I like to be more active when I'm in that space. But they're I guess the ideas kind of the ideas are the same, so it's just about like translating to different mediums. So I guess it's the same thing as being like when you're making like a sound work that you're working on that, you're translating those ideas into that now. So there isn't like a huge gap in my mind about it anymore. I feel like maybe there was before, but now they feel very embedded, because I've like I made WW into a radio play as well at one point, and it just had like a good few different like lives now, so it feels like it's much more organic how it that process. Yeah.
And how did the idea of you moving from the writer to creating this Mary persona or character, and then actually then coming here and somehow impersonating Mary, or retelling the story, extracts that you have to recombine, how that appeared? How did you translate it from the studio through paper to like a stage-like situation where you encounter an audience live?
So how did I translate this?
What was the need, or what was the need for that, or what was the opportunity, or if it felt naturally to then bringing the writing with the sound and the video elements into a setting like this.
When I presented it for my master's in Glasgow, there was a sound and a video element always, because of the relationship with that kind of like moving line. There was always like a visual element to while I was writing it as well, and then because there's like a narrator voice, and this like strong like monologue, I guess. I mean, the whole thing can kind of be read as a monologue of Mary. So it made sense that there was like a sound aspect to it too. So there was maybe more of an abstract sound piece that was like durational, that you could go, like, I think it ran for like 40 minutes, you go in and out and kind of just like occupy being like Mary's mind for a bit. And then when I came back, I hadn't really thought about like doing a performance, and it's not something that I would have thought of before writing it, but because I'd made like such a strong character, it made sense to perform. And this idea as well of like, I guess kind of like hang-ups like that I have around my own voice that I like was like thinking about when I was writing about Mary, it kind of made sense then to like actually speak it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Because the first performance that I did of Mary, I didn't actually speak. It was all just through speakers. So I was just kind of sitting on the stage. And then it became a thing where I spoke as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And going back to the beginning of the text and of the performance, there's a lot of reflection also on your condition as an artist. It's simultaneously the condition of as an artist or an aspiring artist and writer, and the condition of women. When you say, you call yourself a girl or a woman, you never thought about that, and then you go back, you're 25, why are you calling yourself still a girl? But, everywhere it's 18 is kind of like the age that defines the transition, if we could say that chronologically. But there is this parallel idea about reflecting on being an artist, and you mentioned a few times ticking boxes, literally and symbolically, and ticking boxes in arts council forms where you apply for funding to support your practice, and then ticking boxes says like what is expected from you as a woman. Tell us about that. Is that so a little bit of also in terms of your professional development, how much of that need to just present yourself to the world as an artist? And you also reflect, sorry for speaking so much, you also reflect on when people were asking you when you were in college what you study, and say fine art, and they confuse it with finance, which seems more credible than being an artist, right? Tell us a bit about that. How that experience came about, and how did you reflect that, and how you combine it with the other questions about identity and the female condition?
I guess the idea of having to like label yourself as something kind of relates back to that idea of space and confinement, and kind of like what form do you pick, and then I guess like as someone who works across different medias, that can be like tricky as well in applying for funding, and like so I get like very specific about it being in an art context in this, but I think it kind of applies beyond that as well, because like there's like lots of different moments where you might feel like too big for like what's happening, or like that that you can only present like certain parts of yourself, or like you have to compartmentalize. So I most like throughout the text, like all of the different memories are like a moment where like where Mary's like kind of reminded of like being limited by the form that they're given in that situation, or by like the label that they're given in that situation. So like there's like I can't think of anything except for now, where she's like in a change room or in a classroom as well. So it goes through like different scenes where it's like because you like tick this box, like you must act like this or whatever. So I think it relates like to an art experience, but like also kind of beyond that.
Yeah. And how do you see how is the text and the performance being received broadly, but also how do you see this type of work evolving now into what you're doing currently? What are you planning to the future?
Yeah, so I writing a new text, still using Mary as like the main kind of character, and I like the kind of method that I've made for myself, where that like as I'm writing this, I like thinking about like a new painting installation that would be informed by those ideas, and I'm kind of I guess thinking about the mother archetype, and maybe that what I referenced in the performance, this idea of like mother and woman being used interchangeably, and maybe occupying like more of like a shapeshifter archetype, and this kind of like more mischievousness or like trickster kind of archetype So yeah, that's kind of where I'm going with it now.
Yeah.
I guess one of the things that struck me was this idea that you kind of post-rationalize the work after it's completed, and that's kind of struggle for you in how you relate to your work. Could you talk a bit about that, please?
So like after making and then reflecting on it, yeah. So I guess like I feel like that happened in a big way like during like lockdown. So I was like really reflecting on what I was making, and I guess it's kind of like I guess it's just an impulse because
Do you think it's a stumbling block that having to know what it's about, or are you happy enough to kind of go with the flow and work it out afterwards?
But
oh yeah, I like to make like a painting or whatever. I like it's more intuition based, and like particularly because it's like more about being like gestural or whatever. I don't think that afterwards. I think because I've created this character, it kind of just like I feel like the work just kind of like has its own rationale, so I don't feel like I have to explain the painting outside of it being a painting, like, and I think it like to take it away without any of the context, like I don't feel like you need to know anything in order to like experience it or anything like that, and yeah, it like exists as a work on its own in my head anyway. Yeah.
on the other hand, it's something that could be asked, which is, when you decided to do a postgrad studies, you decided to actually go to an art writing program rather than a fine art and MA in art program, and you were doing that MA, and then COVID-19 appeared, then there was lockdown, so I guess you also had to deliver at that level, and the fact that you were actually in a place where you have to write led to that kind of level of reflection. But even beyond that, what led you to do a master in writing when you somehow come from a visual arts background, independently of the fact that you said that writing has always been there? So I'm curious about that as well.
I guess like because the kind of basis for my paintings is like drawing, and then like drawing and handwriting kind of being like two very like similar things, I guess. Yeah. And I guess like the handwritten comes into it a lot as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess I was just drawn towards it, so I tend to follow my intuition a lot. So
Yeah, so there's elements in the book actually are handwritten rather than just typed, and also often within, although it's not maybe the key, it's not necessarily an element across everywhere, but there's a lot of elements also of design, drawing within the writing, or words that are crossed. So there's a play with not just with the writings, like what the words mean, but also the words as form and how they relate to visual poetry from the 60s and the 70s, yeah? But I kind of interrupted you there. So, like, how did you come about, like, how is that you decide to go and do a master in writing, and then one element of that dissertation is to reflect on what you'll be making as a painter?
So that was like something that I chose to pursue in it. So it was like quite like a broad background, and because it was based in the School of Art, so it was like studio led. So we did have like a studio space, but there's people from backgrounds like of literature and film and like less making backgrounds. Yeah. So not everyone made something for their final show and that or whatever. But I guess I felt like the most productive thing for me to do. In terms of like progressing the work more, and yeah, I feel like I guess because what I'm interested in most is kind of like this reflecting on how what influences like our perspectives now on like how we shape identity or how we occupy space, and then. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Yeah, I guess because that's what I'm most interested in. I guess it's
ideas.
Like yeah. So and it makes sense to me to translate them across it feels like I'm getting closer to something. Or,
No, I mean, it's interesting when you said like, so a lot of work being done even physically, visually during lockdown in the porch of your family home, which is a space that you feel the confinement on its own, and the picture plane being also a space of a limited space, a space of limitation, and how liberation from the grid as a structure may take you somewhere. So that's quite interesting, you know, from a personal experience to reflections on art history, and then even the fact that then the book is also following the same format. So we can see a lot of coherence, intellectual coherence around all the elements. Can I ask you? Feel free to intervene. I don't have my phones or my watch. I don't know how we are with time. But can I also ask you just something, which is the fact that we are in Dublin at Palace Project Studios, and this performance was done in Cork a few months ago for the launch of the book, and you've also had other opportunities of presenting some of the work in live moments. How do you feel the work? Say, Roy Keane, of course, is a reference that is national, Irish, but also very connected to Cork. That's where it comes from. And you speak about going to the pub and the references to Cork cities. Tell us a bit about how do you feel the work can be received in a place like this, or the significance of performing it here, or how it can be read outside of your inner world, that where you're coming from. Is there anything that you want to add, or do you think it's irrelevant?
I guess like the opportunity to present, like I guess every like time of performing makes you like reflect on different ideas in the text, but I guess I mean I guess performing in Cork and Dublin is largely kind of like to the same kind of like audience or like backgrounds, and I think it's just because a lot of the ideas were like kind of fermenting when I was in Glasgow. It's just kind of funny to have that distance to be able to like reflect on things maybe a little bit more, or like but I think
And how do you think the references that you have that are Irish specific, say Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, landlord parties, do you think they can translate easily to other contexts? Or I'm interested in how specific the elements are, but also how universal the themes are.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's that thing of being like, oh, the more specific you are, the more universal you are. But I guess it doesn't even really concern me that much, because like it's great that they're universal themes, but I'm also like, I am just more interested in the Irish condition anyway, just by the nature of things.
Yeah.
It's funny when I was like writing the text, and I was like quoting a couple of different people, and I was saying like, oh, like this person's is a physicist before I like say their name, and this person is this, and then before I said Roy Keane, I gave like no description, and my like lecturer who was Spanish was like, who is this? And I was like, oh, is this not universal? So it's funny like what you take for granted as being universal as well.
Yeah.
But it's not something that I'm like actively thinking about.
Yeah. But I guess if any thread, it seems to be if any thread that can be read elsewhere, in the same way here, or already, you know, everything is seen through our own individual eyes and through our own experiences. But you know, I think that this way, for me at least, you know, the way you write seems this sort of reflection on the realization of you of the character or you as a person, but also how somehow your body still reflects the way the female body has been treated and represented across times and across places. And that's, for me, what seems very strong here. I'm not sure what you think about that.
I guess it's just about like the limitations of like of a form or something, and like how different things respond and interact to it.
Yeah.
I have a question. So it seems, just from listening to you talk, you're gradually taking up more and more space with your work, like coming from writing, painting to sound, and then this three-dimensional object. But even that you said that having the sound playing in the background, you felt the need to speak it. So do you think you're going to, like, how do you see that developing? Do you think it's going to get more three-dimensional, take up more space, like physically?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because I do feel like it's kind of like the more that like I keep working at, the more that like there's like references or like references within the work that feel like it just kind of expands to be like a richer world. So then that makes sense in like in terms of expanding out. But yeah, there's something too as well. I don't think I even answered your question earlier, Miguel, about like the beat time, but the kind of idea of like like claiming a space or like taking up space or like marking your presence, I guess is kind of like interesting to me as well. So the idea of like being enshrined in the home, or I guess the idea of being like equated with Mother Ireland, who's been like used or like rendered throughout history for like lots of different reasons, and the fact that this one figure could house all these different different agendas within it, and that like instead of saying like that's like a limitation, it's like leaning into that so that you could like occupy all the possibility of that, if that's not like too abstract sounding, but like the idea that there's possibility in it. Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm interested just to then follow up, like when then a text becomes a book, what's the and then it follows a particular structure where you have people endorsing the book, which is quite common. How does this happen, and what life do you think then it may have beyond performance, beyond yourself, and how do you see this having a life outside of where we are now? Two questions there. One, the process and how this happened, and then how it can continue.
Oh, like the process of
like how does someone who writes a text and is an artist can then publish things like that? Yeah.
So I published with Bloomers, who I was already working with on with the exhibition, and then they've like largely been producing like magazines that kind of survey a particular theme. So their new issue is about housing, but they've had other issues before as well. And then this was probably their first kind of like
monograph.
And maybe fiction piece as well. Like distributing through their network then as well. But like mainly in like art venues.
And how much was what kind of involvement did you have? Did you just hand over the text, or actually you were involved in the design?
I designed it because I was thinking about the idea of it like in relation to like a canvas and the kind of thinking about the idea of it being like marks on a like thinking about it as a visual object, I guess.
So in this particular case, you had already a relationship with this group of people who could support the publishing and distribution of the book. And how did you have? And then there are a few people here, Sarah Baum and Laura Fitzgerald, who kind of endorsed the book. Writers, artists. Is this do you feel connected to them because it's exactly like how you navigate your practice in between different worlds, scenes, but also medium?
Yeah, so like Laura's like a really cool artist, and like really look up to her work, so that was really nice to be able to speak to her about my
and she's also very invested in addressing questions of landscape and territory.
There's like a similar crossover of interests, and has like used fiction and humor as well in their work. So
irony and humor are also very present in the writing and in what we heard, so we can maybe unpack that slightly. And Sarah is also a writer from Cork County,
and she's mentoring me at the minute for writing a new text, so that's really cool. I guess she's an interesting because she works across kind of although more in the writer world, but works across like visual art and writing as well. So I like that kind of. I guess it's nice to find like people in a similar tradition or context to you. Yeah.
And how do you think this work will exist beyond now the context of production? I mean, it's not. You mentioned Laura and Sarah, but it's not so common to have artists being able to produce books and have them out there.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like there is kind of there's a pretty strong history, I feel, of artists writing novels, but maybe they're not necessarily as celebrated as their visual work. Because I guess there's I think about credibility or different or worlds like kind of combining or whatever. So yeah, I think it's an interesting, because there does seem to be like a bit of a tradition there. But yeah, it's interesting, the sharing of your ideas through a book rather than a painting. Like, I guess more people can access a book,
Yeah.
and that it's interesting as a medium. Yeah.
Yeah. And so where can we see yours, to conclude, where will be people in, like audiences in Dublin, be able to see your work again in the near future?
I have a show in South Tipperary Arts Centre opening the 28th of February. So yeah.
That's soon.
Yeah.
And then you also have something in Dublin in the summer.
In So Fine Art in June.
Yeah.
I can't remember the date. No, in May.
Yeah.
In May.
And the new writing that you're developing hopefully will be also published in the book form.
Yes.
And then there will be more new bodies of work, visual bodies of work related to that research that you're developing.
Yep.
Okay, so we look forward to seeing it in the near future here or elsewhere. Sarah, thanks so much for your time and your brilliant work, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.